Here's some information about comparative statics. Think of it as like a before and after. The before shows a picture of a guy before an exercise regime, and the after shows him afterwards. It doesn't show how he got there, and that's the same with the economic analogy. In economics, we're talking about changes in equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity that are caused by shifts in supply and demand. I'm going to change colors. So, first point is that changes in what some books call non-price determinants of supply or demand can alter the position of a supply or demand curve, and that will have an impact in turn on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So, for example, buyer's income is a non-price determinant. It's not product price, but it will affect the position of a demand curve. It could, if buyer's income goes up, it's reasonable to assume that they will demand more of most goods, including the one we're considering, which might be, let's say, gasoline. A non-price determinant of supply could be thought of the cost of inputs that producers face. And changes, increases or decreases in those would have an impact on the position of the supply curve. So the question is, what are the effects on equilibrium price and quantity, equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, caused by shifts in the supply curve position, the demand curve position, or both of them? Second point is keep in mind a graphical depiction of four basic cases. Let's take the first one, which was an increase in demand. We'd show that graphically by shifting the demand curve to the right and just doing the comparative statics thing of the before and after picture. We can see that both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity have both gone up. I'm using arrows as symbols. If demand were to decrease, let's say buyers' income decreased, they could afford less, and if we do the before and after comparison, we see that equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity have both decreased. Notice that pattern. Given an increase in demand, price and quantity increase also, move in the same direction. A decrease in demand, equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity both fall. How about supply? Let's say the cost of input went up. The cost of inputs decreased. That would mean suppliers could afford to bring more to market, and we'd show that by a rightward shift in the supply curve, moving away from the origin. We do the comparative statics comparison. I forgot that little line there. But equilibrium price, when all is said and done, when all the dust settles, equilibrium price has decreased, but equilibrium quantity has increased. So we'll show that with our arrows. So in the case of decreased input prices, that will increase supply, and that will lead in turn to a decrease in equilibrium price, but an increase in equilibrium quantity. What if supply were to decrease? We'd show that by a leftward shift, a leftward shift in supply, label the new one, and compare. Here's the first equilibrium, here's the after equilibrium, and we can just read the graph. So equilibrium price went up in that case, but equilibrium quantity went down. So we'll summarize. Equilibrium price went up in the case of a decreased supply, and equilibrium quantity went down. If I can get that. Good. Okay, let's summarize. So when demand increases or decreases, we know that equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity move in the same direction as that change in demand. So that's kind of easy to remember. And these are worth remembering. In the case of supply, though, it's a little more complicated. When the cost of production went down, that means producers could afford to bring more to market. Okay, so equilibrium price decreased and equilibrium quantity increased. If cost of production, cost of input went up, that would mean that the producers could afford to bring less to market. And so that increases equilibrium price, but decreases equilibrium quantity. What if both supply and demand change? Well, here's a thinking strategy that'll help us get through. Apply the summary of four basic cases that we just went through. These guys. And then the magnitude or the impact on equilibrium price and quantity could depend on the magnitude of the change. Demand and supply could move a lot or a little. And a good word of advice, when in doubt, sketch it out. In other words, use our diagrams. So, point 5, what if both supply and demand increase? Well, let's apply our basics. If supply, for example, were to increase, we know that equilibrium price would decrease, but equilibrium quantity would increase. And if simultaneously we had an increase in demand, we know from before our basic cases that the impact on equilibrium price and quantity moves in the same direction. So for both reasons, notice that equilibrium quantity is going to rise. So we can say with a fair amount of logical consistency and solidness that equilibrium quantity in this case is going to increase. But we're not sure about price because look, an increase in supply decreases equilibrium price, but an increase in demand will increase it. So that we say is indeterminate. We're not sure. And we could sketch that out too, just to show. Supply 1, demand 1, quantity, price. Here's where we start. And supply were to increase, we see equilibrium price falling, and demand were to increase. So you see any possible new equilibrium shows a greater quantity, but we could have a lower price or a higher price. We're not sure. We need more information. Now, 6 point, what if one curve increased and the other decreased? Oh no. Show your say, as they say in the martial arts, your calmness, and apply basics. For example, let's say one function increased, supply increased. We know equilibrium price will fall, equilibrium quantity will increase. Demand, we know from before, are both, the effect is going to be a decrease in equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So here we're not sure. The effect on quantity is indeterminate, but we're pretty sure that price is going to go down. Now we could do that this way. Let's say supply increased a little or supply increased a lot. We're not sure. We're not given enough information. And we could say that demand decreased a little or decreased a lot. But all four of these possible equilibriums with these new diagrams shows a decreased price. It's below that price that we hypothesize as our starting point, our before. But quantity could be greater or less. Okay. Last point is to try a scenario on your own. Let's assume income of buyers in the gasoline market decreased by 50%. That's quite a drop. How would that move the demand curve? To the left or to the right? Would it increase it or decrease it? But let's say at the same time the cost of production for gasoline producers increased. How would that change move the supply curve to the left or to the right? Finally, predict what happens to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Apply your basics, and when in doubt, sketch it out. Thanks very much.